Sarah here again, and I'm looking forward to adding a little bit more to our discussion about dating, and in particular, the dating part two chapter. Like I mentioned in the last video blog, there was so much to cover in the wide span of dating and relationships that I decided it needed to have two chapters. So, dating part two is more about when the relationship, what I call intensifies, moves into maybe engagement and even marriage. And I do want to stress this over and over again. I know I mentioned it several times in the chapter. If you are single, if you're not in an intense relationship, I beg you, please don't skip over this chapter. I wrote this with you in mind as well, so that hopefully one day when you're maybe in the same situation, engaged or maybe married one day, that you will have this in the back of your mind, some life lessons that I've learned and some of my girlfriends have learned, so that you can go about your relationship differently. So we're talking about intense relationships when it moves into engagement and potentially into marriage. And in the book, I did not cover this, but this has since come up in some conversations that I've had the privilege of having with some of my 20-something girlfriends, 20-something age girlfriends. I was preparing for this incredible opportunity at my church to talk to a bunch of guys. It was actually last night, in fact. Um, my Our young adult group leader asked me to share my heart as a female with a bunch of guys. It was just a room full of guys, me and a couple of girls, sharing my heart about the heart of a woman and what we want, what we desire. And in order to prepare for this, I decided I was going to pick the brain of some of my girlfriends that we have a Bible study on Sunday nights. So the other day I said, girls, I need you to share with me, what do you want guys to know about our hearts? And of course, the subject and our hearts, obviously, let me back up. Our hearts, and of course, we were talking about the role of a wife. And half of the room, more than half of the room of girls, I have to preface this by saying they were single. So this was an interesting conversation. There were a few marrieds in there, but most of the room was single. And when I brought up the topic of in the Bible, how, and I'm going to read it in a second, but it says in Ephesians 5, wives submit to your husbands as Christ submitted to the church. I was so expecting my friends to get that submit, face anytime we hear the word submit, because it is kind of a strict, hard word. Respect and submit. That's not one that our culture easily adapts to, I would say. So, much to my delighted surprise, these girlfriends of mine piped right up. None of them had that sour face looking at the word submit, but rather they had an interesting perspective on it. So before we get into that, I want to share the verse with you, just in case you're not familiar with Ephesians 5. This is 22, and then we're going to skip to 25. It says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and himself is its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Then on the flip side, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And then it goes on to say that husbands are to love their wives in this humble manner, in this selfless manner, as Christ gave himself for the church. The men, the husbands, are to love and give themselves to their wives. So back to my conversation with the girls. So when I mentioned this, much to my surprise, nobody gave me that fake, freak out face when the word submit came up. And each and every one of them piped up and said, I can easily submit to my husband if he were a man who loved God with all his heart, mind, and soul. He submitted to God, because then our submission is safe, if you will. If we are submitting and respecting a man, a husband that is fully in line with God, fully worshiping God, then he therefore only has our interest in mind. He only has our welfare in mind, and our heart and our physical body are safe with him. And so it's easy to respect and love a man that also, therefore, loves us with his heart and his soul and gives of himself to us. So that's an interesting concept, and I posed this to the guys, and I was glad to see that they were kind of like, "Wow, that's really neat." And I hope that those men would realize that that's their duty to step up as a leader. But as a female, I'm wondering what you think of the word submit and respecting. No matter, I believe that no matter what our personality type is, whether we're an extrovert like I am, I'm very, extroverted and loud, and someone once called me domineering. I still think, or whether on the flip side, we're more of a quiet, timid person. I think that God made us deep down inside to, as females, to have that need for a leader, to have that need for a man potentially to be the head over us, a godly man. Or else God wouldn't put that in his word. He wouldn't command us to submit to our husbands if he didn't wire us somehow, some way to be like that. But first, that takes us loving God so much and respecting God, then finding a man that is the same way, that loves God, respects God, puts God as his primary, his priority. And that man then in turn loves us with his whole heart, in all humility and without pride, and in a selfless manner. So if you were a woman in the position of that you're engaged, or you are or you're married, or if you are single, I would love for you to consider this verse. Consider how your relationship with a potential husband, or with your current fiance or husband, how that would change if you saw the roles a little bit differently, God defined roles. And if you're single, how does this kind of set you up to look for a man that does in fact love you like Christ loved the church, that sacrificial love? It's a pretty high standard. I think, though, that if we, like I mentioned in the last video blog, if we delight ourselves in the Lord, and if we align our hearts and our needs with what he wants for us, he will place that right person in mind if that is his will. So this is a tough subject, the idea of respect and submitting. It's a fine line. We could go on and on. I'd love to discuss this with you more in the comments section. So I just thought I'd stir the pot a little bit, see what you think, and I hope to converse with you more about it. Have a great day wherever you are. Bye.